For the followers of this channel, it may interest you to know that this particular marker was the inspiration for creating the Mark in History YouTube channel. We just had to know the story behind this 3-sentence marker. During the War of 1812, the British Royal Navy dominated the Atlantic coast, blockading ports and searching for weak points along America's eastern shoreline. However, they did not count on the small sailing ship called the USRC Mercury and its captain David Wallace. This one revenue cutter ultimately prevented the British invasion of North Carolina in 1813. Next on Mark in History. This is the marker for the revenue cutter Mercury. The marker is located on Ocracoke Island here in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Only a few steps away from the USRC Mercury marker stands another very famous marker. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the British Royal Navy killed the historic pirate Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, on November 22, 1718, during a bloody battle off of Ocracoke Island. Blackbeard was hit by 5 gunshots and cut 20 times by sword during his last battle. Our story about the revenue cutters begins right after the War for Independence. Immediately after the American Revolution, the newly established United States struggled financially. The federal government desperately needed revenue. Since there was no income tax, customs and duties were a large income source for the U.S. government. Our new country needed to raise funds, chiefly from tariffs on imports, but smuggling was cutting into the revenue. Strong enforcement of tariff laws by armed government ships was needed to blunt the rampant smuggling. Urged on by the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, Congress established the Revenue Marine Service on August 4, 1790. Later, this service would become the United States Coast Guard. Our country's first president, George Washington, appointed the first 10 cutter masters who oversaw construction of these first ships, called revenue cutters. Their primary purpose was to protect the revenue of the United States by deterring smuggling and enforcing the tariff laws. A revenue cutter was a small to medium-sized, fast and agile vessel designed for speed and shallow draft to chase smugglers. The cutters received an armament of 4 swivel guns, muskets, and small arms. These cutters were not harbor vessels. They were designed to sail out to sea, survive in heavy weather, and sail swiftly so that they might overtake most merchant ships and smugglers. They were the United States' first line of defense against attempts to circumvent duties, the major source of income during this period. In 1807, the revenue cutter Mercury was built and made its home port in the coastal city of Ocracoke, North Carolina. By 1809, its home port was moved from Ocracoke to the inland city of New Bern. Mercury's capable master, Captain David Wallace, came from a prominent family from the state's Outer Banks and had intimate knowledge of the Carolina coast. Built for speed rather than heavy combat, the Mercury patrolled the dangerous waters of the Outer Banks in 1813. North Carolina, with its shallow inlets and scattered defenses, was considered an easy target for the world's largest navy. By late May 1813, the British blockade began to cut off southern cities, including the bustling port town of Ocracoke. On July 12, 1813, a Royal Navy squadron launched a surprise attack, sending ashore 15 armed barges and approximately 3,000 British officers and Marines. The British, under the command of Admiral George Cockburn, raided Ocracoke and Portsmouth Islands as part of the War of 1812. The week-long invasion was the most serious attack on North Carolina during this war. Over the next few days, British troops plundered homes and seized hundreds of livestock, as well as destroying property. Admiral George Cockburn had bigger plans. He hoped to send his barge fleet up Pamlico Sound unnoticed and capture North Carolina's largest and most prosperous city, the important commercial center of New Bern. But there was one small problem: Captain David Wallace and the Mercury. During the island invasion, the British captured 2 American privateers in port, the Anaconda and the Atlas, but the cutter Mercury managed to escape due to the cunning of Captain David Wallace, who knew these waters like the back of his hand. Before the small crew escaped, they collected important custom house papers and bonds for safekeeping before the British could burn them. Using shallow coastal channels that larger British ships could not safely navigate, Captain David Wallace and the Mercury slipped past the enemy. Mercury outran the barges by utilizing every available sail, sacrificing heavy equipment, and by cutting away their accompanying rowboat. She raced across the Pamlico Sound, sailed north up the Neuse River, and arrived safely in New Bern. Mercury's early warning of the impending British invasion allowed New Bern's military officials the time to muster Army regulars and militia forces to defend the city. As news reached the mainland of North Carolina, militia units from across the state gathered in New Bern. The timely warning allowed North Carolina to prepare a defense, thus preventing a full-scale British invasion. Once the advantage of surprise had been compromised, British commanders abandoned their mission to attack New Bern. Admiral George Cockburn reversed his invasion plans, deciding instead to sail up the East Coast to burn down the buildings in our nation's capital. New Bern's newspaper, the Carolina Federal Republican, wrote on July 31st, "Captain David Wallace of the revenue cutter merits the highest praise for his vigilance, address, and good conduct in getting the cutter away from the enemy and bringing us the most speedy intelligence of our danger." The cuttermen who served in the War of 1812, such as Wallace and the crew of the cutter Mercury, are now long forgotten and lost to the cobwebs of history. But these men who went in harm's way to defend American freedom deserve recognition as some of the earliest heroes to walk the long blue line of the U.S. Coast Guard. If history can be taught with stories, it can never be forgotten. Please like our video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell to stay informed on the latest video. And don't forget to leave your comments below and tell us what you like about this video.